Hello, welcome to the second of our videos of worship for Sunday the 10th of October 2021. In this video I'm going to speak about the Bible readings which Jean has read to us and we're going to consider how they might apply in the modern world. In the sermon outline prepared by the people who write the material for Safeguarding Sunday, the Bible readings that we've just heard are used to make 2 points. The first point is that we should be concerned for the welfare of the vulnerable. The word which Jean read as destitute, speak up for the rights of those who are destitute in the New International Version, is translated as vulnerable in the contemporary English version. Actually, the verse was addressed to kings rather than to ordinary people like us. And just a couple of verses earlier it says, "Give beer and wine to the poor and to the needy, in order that they can drown their sorrows." So perhaps that's not quite the advice that we would be offering to leaders in the world today. But I think we can all agree that speaking up for the vulnerable is a good thing to do. Who are the vulnerable? Well, there's different definitions, but perhaps the Bible's definition in this verse, the ones who cannot speak up for themselves, perhaps that's a good place to start. And the other point that the material wanted to make from the Bible passages is that Jesus is concerned for the welfare of children, and we should be too. But actually, in those verses that Jean read, Jesus wasn't talking about the children just quite yet. He was asked, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? So he called a child and had him stand in front of them, and he said to his disciples, "I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." He wasn't actually talking about the child standing in front of them, was he? He was talking about the disciples, about us. If we want to enter the kingdom of heaven, become like children in what way? Children, when they're born, are completely selfish, aren't they? And they have to be taught things like how to share toys and how to take turns and how to look at the world through somebody else's point of view instead of just their own. And as any school teacher knows, children can be most incredibly cruel. And it's only later in the Bible passage, after the bit that Jean read to us, that Jesus goes on to say that the welfare of children is important, and woe to those who cause these little ones who believe in me to sin. And even then it's not quite clear that the little ones who believe in him are actually children. It might mean the disciples who have emptied themselves, humbled themselves, and become like little children. But nevertheless, what the sermon outline about what I'm supposed to say today says is still true. There are hundreds of examples in the Bible about how God is concerned for those who have little voice in our society today, the vulnerable, and that he wants us to be concerned for them too. Jesus does speak harshly of those who cause little ones to sin in this Bible passage. In Luke's Gospel, Luke even makes the whole theme of Jesus' ministry, his manifesto, into "I've come to bring good news to the poor," the manifesto from Isaiah chapter 61. How are we supposed to translate this stress of the Bible on those who have little into our concerns for safeguarding these days? Well, they say, don't they, that Christians should read with the Bible in one hand and with the newspaper in the other. So this week I decided to keep an eye on what the newspaper said about things that went on. In my case, the online BBC News, as well as the New Scientist magazine that I regularly read. On Monday, the headline was, Facebook whistleblower reveals identity. A lady had charged Facebook with the charge that Instagram made teenage girls feel worse about themselves rather than better about themselves. Now, her identity was the point of the story, but the story about the Instagram bit, Instagram was impacting the mental health of teenagers, but Facebook, although it knew this, took no action. Apparently, 32% of teenage girls surveyed said that when they felt bad about their bodies, Instagram made them feel worse. And the conflict of interest between what's in the public good and what's in Facebook's good is fairly obvious. On Tuesday, I caught up with my New Scientist magazine the previous week. I found this article. Children who grow up in homes which are filled with books tend to have less cognitive decline when they reach old age, even when you take into account factors like wealth and health, physical health rather than mental health, and other things to do with that. The researchers had analysed data from more than 8,000 men and women aged 65 plus without Alzheimer's disease who had taken memory tests between 2011 and 2013, and there was a clear correlation between the number of books that they'd had as children in their homes and their lack of decline. On Wednesday, there was the report of the French Roman Catholic Church's inquiry into sexual abuse by French clerics, which said that 216,000 children had been abused since 1950. Of these, the majority were boys aged 10 to 13. It said the church knew about these things and had often failed to take action and even put perpetrators in the places where they could abuse further children. And the inquiry also found that about 60% of men and women who had been abused had gone on to encounter major problems in their emotional or sexual lives. And of course, there has been a similar inquiry into many major denominations, including the Church of England, and it has had damning results, although not damning on the same scale in all denominations. On Thursday, the news was that Prince Andrew has been granted access to a sealed document about an agreement between Virginia Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein. And apparently this document says something about that she agreed not to prosecute others who were involved in the abuse bit. Prince Andrew, of course, has always denied that there's been anything to do with it. But that raises the whole business, doesn't it, about, well, what counts as evidence and what is admissible and how much power do people have over their lives. And then on Friday, the next New Scientist arrived, and I read an article all about repressed memories, why it's time to ditch this dangerous idea. The idea that memories can be repressed only to submerge years later was debunked apparently in the 1990s when memory researchers pointed out that the concept goes against everything that we know about how memory works. The idea that memories could be repressed can be traced to Sigmund Freud, who actually changed his views later on in his life, but the idea stuck. And it relies on the idea that memory is a bit like a filing cabinet. But now we know that memory is about connections between different parts of the brain, electrical connections, and these need to be reinforced. And the way that they are reinforced is by recalling and reliving the memory. But every time somebody recalls or relives something, there's the possibility of the memory of it being changed. And actually, your memory of a past event is only as good as the last time you called it to mind. It obviously has major implications, doesn't it, about how we diagnose what has really happened in the past. And the article went on to talk about the implications for various sex abuse cases. How are we supposed to build a bridge between the Bible on the one hand and the newspaper articles on the other? Well, I suppose these are some of the issues, aren't they? We live in a naturally unkind world. We don't safeguard people by doing nothing, but we have a responsibility to try and build in people a positive self-image. Perhaps the message to Instagram should be that people need to have a positive idea of who they are in God's sight, in order that they have got something to fight other people's negative comments with. And perhaps that's one of the most important things about the Christian faith, that it gives people an understanding that they are surpassingly worthwhile in God's sight. And therefore, what other people think can be, in a way, rather downgraded. It says, doesn't it, that taking proper care of children is important, giving them something meaningful to read earlier on in life and bringing them up in a way that they can see the widest possible picture of the world actually does stand them in good stead for the whole of their lives. And good Christian education has always been about broadening the mind in its widest sense. Helping people to avoid making mistakes in their lives is important. The importance of not allowing people to sign non-disclosure agreements which may later on hinder their cases. We need to have clear standards, don't we, about what's acceptable and what isn't. Because if you don't, then bad behaviour comes normalised. Why is it that churches have protection policies? Well, it's so that everybody knows what is acceptable, and so that people who notice what isn't acceptable know that it's not acceptable and have the moral fibre to be able to report it. And I hope that you, if you notice something that's going wrong in a church, will have the courage to report it to somebody in order that it can be dealt with. We all need to think about how our own conduct can be held to account. How would we show our own integrity if it was challenged? Don't be on our own with a vulnerable person is one of the things in policies. Have rules about the fact that we are accountable. Have escape clauses in our mind about what we'll do if we're left in a position of vulnerability, so that we can't be accused. And when listening to people, we need to avoid suggesting things to them. We need to take a careful account of what they say, listen with an open mind, record it properly and sign and date it, report it to somebody who knows, but then it's all out in the open. And perhaps the most important lesson is, if the church doesn't clean up its act, then its ability to reach people with the gospel will be seriously compromised. Compromised? Well, it'll be destroyed. The fact is that we will probably not survive it if we are found to be guilty in this respect. People rightly say that the safeguarding is not the heart of the gospel, but the safeguarding people rightly say it's very close to the heart of the gospel. The business of bringing Jesus into people's lives is about doing them immeasurable good and keeping them safe from harm. And we need to remember that and put it into practice as we share the surpassing good news of our Lord Jesus. And that's the end of the second of these 3 videos, but to follow us into the third one, in which we sing and in which we pray, please just again choose it when it comes on the screen after I've finished speaking to you, and we'll see you there.